title of my speech and of my article was how is it possible that non-believers are non-believers, and we should this question take in another form. It's legitimate to ask why is some person religion? What's your belief and why? And legitimate are both these questions. So we need to understand the starting point of communities, of groups, and some persons in the real situation of their life. So the main question in religion and in the human life is mortality and immortality. But for many people in this time it's not so important like the religious people and churches and pastors and so on think. So we have to ask what is the ground for our spiritual perception of the world? What is the core of our system of ideas? What can we offer for these people? And it's something what is not so clear. So we must take some survey, and for all we have and we must to understand what the other people say and what they need from us.
Main point is in this excellent project on the end that Christianity and as well the churches, not only the Catholic Church, but perhaps first of all the Catholic Church, should rethink what means not religious people. During the 3 years of the common work, we understood more and more that nuns is an umbrella category. There are very, very different types of nuns. Some people, they are inside of the church nuns because they are not really satisfied with the supply of the churches. And of course, there are a lot of nuns outside of the church, but not all nuns are atheists. They are nuns, they are open-minded people. Only they confronted not yet with a clear answer of the church to the main traumata of the world today. My main focus is Central and Eastern Europe, and as the entire project focused on the so-called 4 Visegrad countries, and especially in these countries, the question of nuns is not the same question as, for example, in Belgium or in French or in the Netherlands. In our countries, nuns, the category of nuns and the main feeling of nuns is, I think, very close connected to the entire historical heritage of these countries, not only the heritage of the communist time, it is as well here, but in the former centuries, all these societies were hardly fighting for an autonomous statehood, for a sovereignty, for the right of the own language, the usage of the own language, and all these ressentiments are present if people are religious or even though non-religious people. And in my presentation, I wanted to highlight how important it is, first of all, to understand the main markers of the societies in Central Europe, and only after them to ask what is the main cultural offer of Christian people, of churched Christian people, and how can we more understand the readiness and the richness of people who are not religious, who are not churched, but religious people, because I think all people in our societies are deeply interested to find out the way for a satisfied life, not only on the material level, but on the spiritual level as well.
When we talk about synodality of the church, basic ideas which has been proposed by the Pope Francis were the ideas of participation of all believers on everything what is happening in the church, and to increase also the corresponsibility of all members of the church. When we think of this, synhodos means to walk together. Hodos in Greek is journey, and it is actually interpretation of traditional Jewish term halacha. It's the way of life. When we talk of synod, it means that the church is reconsidering the way of believing in concrete historical period. When I think what can make really that this synod will really happen and will be implemented, we need to think of that idea which Pope Francis is trying to underline in many his discourses, and this is the idea of clericalism. Clericalism is something what is very much embedded in today's practice of the church, and this idea of clericalism, the central role of the clergy in a Roman Catholic Church. So this is something where the use of the power needs to be reconsidered, and best idea is to look at the society in today's world, and we see that division or separation of legislative, executive, and judicial power. And when we have everything connected to the sacred power, which is connected to priestly ordination or to the sacrament of priesthood, this is something what needs to be reconsidered. And so the problem of the church nowadays seems to be not only practical and pastoral, but also theological. Certain things need to be actually not only reinterpreted, but we need to think of practical consequences of everything what we are doing. People like spirituality. They want to meditate, they want to pray, they know about spiritual powers, but they don't think of the church and organized religion. And we think that especially in past 20 years, Roman Catholic Church on that level of the hierarchical structure was going through very serious crisis. And that's why the trust needs to be renewed in a way, and that spiritual renewal is probably nowadays not possible without structural changes. And this is something what is very much connected to, I call it, intellectual honesty. When Holy Pope John Paul II signed the document Memoria e Riconciliazione la Chiesa alle colpe del passato, Memory and the Reconciliation, it was Jubilee year, and John Paul II asked for forgiveness for all crimes which the Church committed in the past. This is something where we need to acknowledge that we missed certain points, that the Church was doing something not in a right way, and at the same time we need to implement certain measures how to avoid everything what happened in the past in the future. We just cannot only continue doing what we have done, and for those reasons our structural changes are really important. And that's why participation, when all believers need to come with the feedback and carry out also that common co-responsibility for everything what is happening in the church. This is something what is very crucial to that dimension of synodality. Not only the hierarchy and the authority can decide and talk how about the church is going to look like in the future, but everybody needs to be heard and everybody needs to be encouraged to express his or her opinion. And the last but not least is the question of interdisciplinarity. Theology cannot just talk on her own. Theology needs to enter in dialogue with especially social science, psychology, sociology, medicine and genetics. This everything needs to be taken in consideration, and this is something when the Copernicus 2.0 is coming into the history of the church, and this is new necessity to acknowledge our own limitations and to invite other competent people to talk about sexuality, to talk about psychology, to talk about everything what we experience in our emotions. And the last but not least, for the second time, is also the challenges of artificial intelligence. We are entering the technological age with many innovations where technologies are really transforming the world. And we see that this is not only ethical and moral problem, but nowadays it is necessary to understand what is happening. And this is the dimension of interdisciplinarity, when technology brings us not only to use the opportunity for interdisciplinary approach, but it's a must, it's our moral duty. And my biggest and the strongest question mark is implementation. I ask myself, without participation and corresponsibility, we will not be able to implement. Because who is going to implement everything what Synod is going to find and to discover something what is necessary to do? Those former leaders or those new leaders who are not still in place. That's why we need to look for new people somewhere else and to encourage those in the church who really care, and they will really walk together with others and they will carry on what Synod will discover. And of course we need to pray, but we need at the same time to think and to talk with others, and this is what really the life is about. We walk together, and this is our way of life as Christians, believers or non-believers, or better to say those who believe something else than we do.
My presentation is about Pope Francis' approach to the war in Ukraine, and it's a critical appraisal of the way Pope and the Vatican dealt with this crisis. Pope, as probably everybody knows, has supported Ukrainian victims, but he tries to avoid mentioning Russia or Vladimir Putin by name. And for some people, it makes sense that he's not supporting Ukrainians enough. In my presentation, I try to understand reasons why the Pope is doing it this way, but at the same time to look at it critically. In my opinion, Pope does it this way, first of all, because he is afraid of yet bigger evil. It is, and the bigger evil may be a holy war, a war justified by religion, or a nuclear war. That's why he's trying to be quasi-neutral. In my opinion, however, it is all based on a quite naive assumption that Russian leader Vladimir Putin may be able to be convinced in some way. In my opinion, Pope hasn't noticed that Russia in some moment stopped being like any other authoritarian regimes. It became a new form of totalitarian regime with all the dangers of totalitarianism. Therefore, this war should not be treated as any other war, but with different means. And I'm speaking it from my Polish perspective, where discussion about Pope's approach to the war in Ukraine was much wider and very hot, much wider than here, and very hot. And the problem is that in Poland nowadays the Catholic Church is losing its authority among many people, especially young people. But for some of them, Pope Francis was a kind of last resort, and now this last resort failed. It means that these people are even more disillusioned, not just with Church in Poland, but with Catholic Church in general. But what causes a new situation for future?
One of the results of this project is my book, The Afternoon of Christianity. I use the metaphor which Carl Gustav Jung used to describe the dynamism of human life. For Jung, childhood and youth is the morning of life. Then is the midday crisis, and then afternoon of life is a time for maturity, the possibility, the chance to go deeper in life. And I think something similar is in the history of Christianity. The youth is the pre-modern Christianity. It was the time for building the institutional structures, the doctrinal structures of Christianity. Then came modernity, secularization, atheism. Those structures were shattered. And I think now we are on the threshold of this afternoon of Christianity. In the past, in the Middle Age, in time of Christianitas, Christian faith was religio in sense of integrational force of society. It's over. And in modernity, Christianity became one of the world views. And now, in the postmodernity, in the post-secular age, the Christianity should be a religion in sense of relegere, the relectire, the new reading, new hermeneutics of the sign of the time, new relecture of the Christian tradition, of the scripture, but also the new hermeneutics of events in the culture and in the society. I call this method kairology, to recognize the kairos, time of opportunity. Sometimes the changes of paradigm in culture and society, it's a time of crisis, but all these crises are also opportunities to go deeper and do the things in the broader context.